Undersecretary Kemp, more people have lost the right to vote in the state of Georgia. They've been purged, they've been suppressed, and they've been scared. This is a man who had someone arrested for helping her blind father cast a ballot. He raided the offices of organizations to stop them from registering voters. That type of voter suppression feeds the narrative, because voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote. It's also about creating an atmosphere of fear, making people worry that their votes won't count.
Tonight in Georgia, an election that is effectively deadlocked. Stacey Abrams, the Democrat you saw there, running to become the first African-American female governor in American history, faced off in a debate with Republican Secretary of State Brian Kemp. Abrams is currently suing Kemp for suppressing votes in the election that he is both running in and overseeing. Kemp, for his part, is well aware that African-American and minority turnout is a problem for him. He voiced his concerns over Abrams' voters' outreach to donors at an event last week. A recording of that event was given to Rolling Stone reporter Jamil Smith, who posted it online hours before tonight's debate.
As worried as we were going into the start of early voting with the literally tens of millions of dollars that they are putting behind to get out the vote efforts for their base, a lot of that with absentee ballot requests. They have just an unprecedented number of that, which is something that continues to concern us, especially if everybody uses and exercises their right to vote, which they absolutely can, and mails those ballots in. We got to have heavy turnout to offset that.
Kemp's campaign today confirmed he was at the event and made no comment on the remarks. Tonight, the issue of election integrity was central to the debate.
As you know, in a recent video, you called on illegals to vote for you in this election. I was actually shocked. I had to watch that video twice. So my question is, why are you encouraging people to break the law for you in this election?
Mr. Kemp, you are very aware that I know the laws of Georgia when it comes to voting. In fact, I am one of the foremost experts in the state on expansion of voting rights. And I have never in my life asked for anyone who is not legally eligible to vote to be able to cast a ballot. What I've asked for is that you allow those who are legally eligible to vote to allow them to cast their ballots. And in fact, we took you to court in 2016, and a federal judge said that you illegally canceled 34,000 registrations. You used the exact same system, the exact match system that is under dispute right now.
Talk more about this race. I'm joined by Janae Nelson, Associate Director and Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and Dale Ho, Director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. So there's a policy thing happening here in Georgia. There's a fascinating kind of personal story here, which is that these two people have been facing off on this issue way before this election happened.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. It's been a really interesting dance leading up to this election, where you have the person who's been in charge of elections for years now being a candidate and reaping the benefits of all of the manipulation and all of the voter suppression that he's engaged in for years. Since 2012, he's been responsible, Brian Kemp, for 1.4 million registration cancellations. And most recently, we found out that there were voter purges just last year after he announced his candidacy. And we have voters who were removed from the rolls. He's effectively choosing the people who are able to participate in this election and choosing the voters who may ultimately elect him or his opponent into the gubernatorial office.
What does the law say about what you can and can't get away with? I mean, the fascinating thing about voting rights, right, in the history of the country is that they're constantly, since the period after Reconstruction, they're shot through with bad faith, right? So all of the efforts to suppress the vote, particularly in the South after Reconstruction, are facially race neutral, right? Like, oh, take a literacy test. Like, oh, we're going to close a polling place here. They knew what they were doing, right? So the question now becomes, like, what can you do and not do if you say, oh, we're going to purge 1 million people, you can get away with that, purge 4 million people? Like, what is the standard?
Well, a lot of what Brian Kemp has done is illegal. We're challenging a number of his practices. The danger here is that it takes time to litigate these cases, right? And if we can't get relief in the courts before the election, it's too late. There's no way to redo the election and get people's voting rights back before November.
Right. So the remedy there is no one gets to say, like, get the other person elected.
Right.
But there's a reason that Georgia was once covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act that we know the Supreme Court basically eviscerated in 2013 in the Shelby County versus Holder decision. And the reason that law was so effective and in place was because of places like Georgia that routinely engages in voter suppression, and therefore were required to present any change, like the purging of 100,000 voters or the changing of polling sites or the cancellation of registrations. They had to present those changes to the federal government for clearance.
Just to be clear, that's all stuff that would have to go through pre-clearance?
That's right.
If you purge voters?
Yeah, if you change the rules and if you're just doing routine voter list maintenance, that's one thing. But if you are changing the rules that affect who gets to stay on the rolls and who doesn't, that's a change. If you are engaged in the cancellation of registrations based on a new rule that you've put into place, then you would need to seek some sort of pre-clearance.
There are still opportunities to get emergency relief. Lawyers from the ACLU and the ACLU of Georgia, the legal director of the ACLU of Georgia, Sean Young, was in court today arguing that what Georgia is doing, throwing away absentee ballots. You heard Brian Kemp complain that there are too many people casting absentee ballots. Yes. It's like the head of the IRS complaining that there are too many people, I don't know, paying their taxes or something like that. But we were in court today on an emergency motion to stop the state from throwing away absentee ballots without first verifying that those ballots were, in fact, legitimately cast by voters.
There's also the question about this sort of conflict of interest that hangs over all this. And one of the moments in the debate tonight, he said he had no plans, if there were a recount, he had no plans to recuse himself from a recount, which just, I think, strikes everyone as kind of a little weird. Like, you're going to oversee the recount?
Yeah, I mean, if Chris Kobach is besting you in this area, then you've got a problem. I mean, he really should commit ahead of the election to assure voters, to instill some sense of security and integrity in the process, to say, if there is a recount, I will recuse myself. Frankly, we demanded, the Legal Defense Fund sent a letter last week demanding that he step away voluntarily from supervising the elections. Doesn't mean he has to necessarily abdicate his office entirely, but in terms of his responsibilities concerning the Georgia elections, the idea that he is still in charge of that process is absurd. In any other circumstance, we would see this as a clear conflict of interest and an invitation for self-dealing.
Is Georgia, I mean, Kansas, obviously, Chris Kobach is notorious. I wonder, is Georgia out of line with other states, or is it just the fact that Brian Kemp is running that has put the spotlight on it?
Brian Kemp has I think, pretty bad history when it comes to suppressing votes. When I was asked about Brian Kemp before, is he, doing something new? What I'd say is he's not doing something new, but he's using every old trick in the book, and that's what's kind of unique about him. He doesn't just champion sort of one restriction on voting, the way Chris Kobach, for instance, with his proof of citizenship law. Brian Kemp's got a strict voter ID law. He's got purges for not voting, something that the Supreme Court unfortunately upheld in a case coming out of Ohio the other year. He has this exact match program, which Stacey Abrams challenged and now is apparently back online. And then now he's got this system of rejecting absentee ballots based on someone's eyeball test of whether or not the signature appears to match someone's voter registration.
That's what they're using right now?
That's what we were in court today challenging. Several hundred ballots have already been rejected, or ballot requests have been rejected in Georgia, I'm sorry. The number is expected to go up as we get closer to Election Day based on just an eyeball test, that someone's signature on their absentee ballot or their ballot request doesn't look like the voter registration form. All we're asking for is that those voters get notified and have a chance to say, don't throw my ballot away, that was me.
That seems like a fair ask. Janae Nelson and Dale Ho, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.